School of Medicine, and I'm in the office with Joan Trent, who is program coordinator, and Dalmisha Green, who is program manager of the HBCU CFE. And I'm Dr. Harrington, co-project director. Dr. Gail Maddox is the project director, and she's away at another meeting at this time. And we want to welcome you to another wonderful webinar entitled Self-Care for the Helping Professionals, Exploration of Self-Care and Combating Compassion Fatigue for the Helping Professionals. And it's done by Lisa Black. And before I introduce her, I'd like to say something more about the HBCU Center for Excellence.
The leader has muted your line. To unmute your line, press #6.
This webinar is made possible through a cooperative agreement with the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, known as SAMHSA, the Center for Substance Abuse Treatment, CSAT, and the Center for Mental Health Services, CMHS. And Morehouse School of Medicine established the historically black colleges through these initiatives, and the Center for Excellence in Behavioral Health, HBCU Center for Excellence, funded as a grant number TI 023447. And the goals of the HBCU Center for Excellence are to promote student behavioral health, to positively impact student retention, to expand campus service capacity, including the provision of culturally appropriate behavioral health resources, and finally, to facilitate best practices, dissemination, and behavioral health workforce development. And at this time, I'll go ahead and introduce our speaker for today, who is Lisa Black. And Lisa is currently the program manager for Southeast Addiction Technology Transfer Center, known as SATTC. She is responsible for training initiatives for Georgia and Tennessee in that capacity. Lisa holds a bachelor's degree in social work from the University of Memphis, and she has a graduate degree in educational counseling from Troy University, and she's currently pursuing her PhD in psychology with a specialty in addiction studies, and that's with Capella. That's with Capella University. Now, she is currently a certified addiction counselor 2, a certified clinical supervisor, and she's a certified Prime for Life risk reduction instructor, also certified clinical evaluator, and she's currently pursuing, as I mentioned earlier, her PhD in psychology with a specialty in addiction. She has worked in the field of social services for a number of years and addictive disease for over 15 years. She has served in capacity in various facets of addiction disease to include clinical supervision, counseling strategies, gender-specific programming, DUI risk reduction facilitator, project director, military training initiatives, community outreach, program leadership, and regulatory compliance. And Lisa is compassionate about workforce retention and training initiatives related to clinical skill enhancement. And with that introduction, I'd like to go ahead and present our guest webinar speaker today, Lisa Black.
Thank you, Dr. Harrington and Mrs. Trent. It is with great pleasure that Southeast Addiction Technology is having the opportunity to present today. And our hope is that the training will be informative and that everyone will leave with a clear understanding of compassion fatigue and will have great emphasis in terms of how to practice best care in the field of social service. Just a little history in terms of Southeast Addiction Technology Transfer Network. Southeast Addiction Technology Transfer Center provides technology transfer, workforce development, training, events, distance education, research translation, product dissemination, technical assistance, and systems change, just to name a few. In addition to that, SATTC supports in the efforts of frontline counselors, clinical supervisors, administrators, as well as students, policymakers, and educators. SATTC covers various states throughout throughout the region. We cover territory all throughout Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Tennessee. We are located here at the Morehouse School of Medicine, and our telephone number is actually listed there as well in case anyone has any questions moving forward. So the objectives of this training is, our hope is to explore the concept of compassion fatigue and the importance in self-care for the helping professional. We're hoping to explore the risk associated with compassion fatigue and identify who is most at risk for experiencing compassion fatigue, explore factors to combat compassion fatigue and the link related to professional best practice in behavioral health settings, workforce development, and student retention. By attending this webinar, participants will identify compassion fatigue. The participants will also have a better understanding of the risk associated with compassion fatigue. We'll also have an opportunity to develop a better understanding of key concepts to combat compassion fatigue in order to provide quality services, thus promoting personal wellness in the helping professional and the retention of healthy, skilled professionals. So just a little bit in terms of compassion fatigue and the role of burnout and why this topic is so near and dear to us here at Southeast Addiction Technology Transfer. I can recall myself that this has in fact been a journey. And I can in fact recall early on my junior year of college there at the University of Memphis, I had an opportunity to serve in the role of an intern working directly in a mental health facility. Boy, was I excited. I was so excited. I was thrilled. I was just pleased and happy to be there. And I really just walked around with my heart on my sleeve. And I was thinking, you know, I'm here to help everyone. I'm going to save everyone, bake some cookies, and we'll be on our way. Boy, was I surprised. I was wrong. I had it all wrong. And I had to recognize that it was a journey. Upon that journey, I can recall starting out doing individual counseling with a very small caseload as this intern, needing this level of support. From that, my caseload grew, the paper mounted, crisis erupted, and it just seemed as though I was just falling behind in terms of having a clear understanding in terms of how to practice best self-care and to be able to still service the client. So I can recall one day sitting down, speaking with my clinical supervisor in great detail about the areas of concern that was there. And she said, you know, you just have to learn how to put it down. If things are in place, you have to learn how to put it down and move on, and things will be okay. And I said, well, how do you do that? Just how do you do that? I don't understand. I don't get it. She said, well, okay, dear, it's just like this. She grabbed her keys, she grabbed her purse, and she left. I grabbed my peanut butter and jelly sandwich and walked back down to continue to do some more case management notes because I still hadn't gotten that key concept at that particular time. So from that, we developed an understanding that it is imperative that the helping professional takes the time to assess the role of the helping professional. We have to have our roles very clear and understand the correlations related to essential elements of self-care in order to combat compassion fatigue and to ultimately provide quality care by promoting wellness in the helping professional. And like we said, our goal is to retain those healthy, skilled, competent professionals. We could talk about the role of compassion fatigue and burnout and being overwhelmed all day. But the reality remains there is not enough time in the day because I'm sure that we all have a very sincere thought process as it relates to it. One of the quotes that are near and dear to my heart is by John F. Kennedy, and he talks about how we must use time as a tool, not in fact as a crutch. So I thought, what does that mean, use time as a tool and not in fact as a crutch? That means time management is essential for the helping professional in order for us to be able to prevent compassion fatigue and burnout. You know, Nelson Mandela stated it very eloquently when he said, we must use time wisely and forever realize that the time is always right to do right. meaning it's always right for us to take a moment and to practice self-care and to take care of ourselves as we explore the task of helping others. With that being said, there has been a mass exodus of addiction counselors in the field. In a single year, 1 in 3 substance abuse counselors and 1 in 4 clinical supervisors in a national sample of 27 treatment organizations left their jobs. This information actually comes from colleagues over at the University of Georgia. And when you're thinking about it, you know, we want to think in terms of what could go on to cause individuals that enter the field with so much passion and dedication. They're well-trained and well-versed, and they're here and they're prepared, and they want to be able to make a difference in the lives of their clients. So that's obviously an opportunity to do some brainstorming. You know, what do you think, or why do you think such a large number of helping professionals are leaving the field of social service? Well, we have a wide array of options that are here for us to select. The reasons obviously vary. The reasons could incorporate long hours. Typically, working in the helping profession is typically not a 9 to 5. Obviously, when individuals are working in sectors such as nonprofit, such as educational sectors, such as community outreach, such as hospitals, those hours vary. And even in that, you know, an individual may have to be on call 24/7 in order to complete the fulfillment of their tasks. One of the other essential reasons is salary. You know, obviously there has been a lot of talk about workforce retention and how we can develop and even in fact recruit highly qualified, competent staff to come in and work in the area of social service. We know that salary is definitely pretty much a barrier. And so we have to take that into perspective in terms of working in the field of nonprofit or social service. And for agencies, that's definitely an opportunity for us to explore incentives, ways to recognize associates and employees, and ways for employees and associates to feel a sense of belonging. Another reason in particular is large caseloads. Caseloads vary. Obviously, if you're working with a client that presents with extensive mental health and or substance abuse issues, the hope is that the caseload ratio will be a lot lower. But that is not, in fact, talking about the milieu. And when we say milieu, we're meaning the community. Anyone that knows anything about working in nonprofit sectors or working in community outreach programs, you become responsible for the collectiveness of the entire operation or the entire program. So that means that when you're talking about caseload, we have to think about it in terms of an integrated system of care when we're working with our clients. Funding issues is obviously always a primary area of concern for so many individuals that work in the area of social service or higher education. Will we have enough money to complete the task at hand? Will funding run out? Making sure that variables are met in terms of grants in order to be able to continue to receive funding. In addition to that, the stressful nature of the client service. We have to keep in mind that when we're servicing our clients, even in fact with our students, in which we'll talk about that in a few moments, our client service come in with a wide array of issues and concerns that need to be addressed. And guess who they're waiting on to address it? They're waiting on us. So it's essential that we're practicing best care for self in order for us to be able to benefit our client service. Some of the other reasons consist of organizational politics, work demands, and above all, compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue has been identified as being an occupational hazard. It is not just a hazard for one person, it is a hazard for the entire organization, and it is an area of concern that must be addressed. So when we talk about compassion fatigue, obviously we have to talk about burnout. And just historically, let's look at some information here as it relates to burnout. Burnout is a term developed in 1974 by Herbert Fernberger in his book, Burnout, The Cost of High Achievement. Many individuals that are working in regards to social service or social work degrees or counseling degrees, they've had an opportunity to actually do some research on this work. But we know that it's the extinction of motivation or incentives. We have to be incentivized or motivated, especially where one's devotion to a cause or relationship fails to produce the desired results. American psychologist Herbert Fernberg coined the phrase burnout in 1970. Look at how long ago that has been, and we're still talking about this phenomenon till today. This term was used to describe the penalty of rigorous stress and high expectations experienced by helping professionals. So when we're looking at burnout, let's kind of break it down and look at what burnout actually refers to. Burnout refers to a state of becoming overwhelmed, emotional indolence, and depression due to prolonged levels of high stress, usually related to excessive workplace and or lifestyle demands. Symptoms of burnout can vary among individuals, but tend to include many of the following. They include areas of irritability in which we may not even physically recognize that we're becoming irritable. Our coworkers may definitely realize that we're becoming irritable, or our students may definitely realize that, but we don't actually realize it. A lack of motivation. Maybe once before we were motivated to work on tasks or to work on projects, and then the time frame comes that that individual sees that they're not as motivated to want to be that stand-up person and get things done. Loss of creativity. Obviously, we know that anytime we're working with students or anytime we're working with clients, it requires a significant level of creativity. Things are not always black and white. Things are not always policy and procedure, and things are not always there on demand. So we have to be very creative in terms of how we're going to meet the needs of the clients. And oftentimes, when we're experiencing burnout, we'll have difficulty in the area of creativity. Physical symptoms are there as well, like headaches or fatigue. So those are just some frameworks in terms of really focusing in on the physical well-being of ourselves, in terms of there may be some tension headaches, or we may, in fact, experience significant periods of fatigue. In addition to that, it may be a change in sleeping patterns. We hear it so often, as long as I've been working in social service, you hear people say, I just haven't been sleeping well at night. I only got 2 hours of sleep. And it's almost like it's a noble way of saying that, I've been working really hard, I've been putting in excessive time. But it's really a way of not practicing best care practice, in a way of not fully being attentive to our clients and our population service. Another area of burnout is dread of going to work, and in fact, in some cases, anger. Here's just some more research findings. Sandfeld and Bradley in 2002 actually completed surveys from 115 internal medicine residents. 76% responding residents met the criteria for Maslow's burnout inventory, and we'll actually look at that inventory and some of those key questions that are there coming up in a few moments. There was also a significant elevation in self-report and positive assessment of depression. Now, if memory serves me correctly, I think that we've mentioned the word depression at least 3 times since we started this webinar series. What we know about burnout is we know that burnout does not just occur with counselors and educators. College students, our beloved college students, are oftentimes experience burnout. Stress is often a combination of mental overload, physical fatigue, exhaustion, and increased negative feelings. Recognizing and combating burnout can oftentimes be very difficult. So in that, let's take a stab at it. Why do students, in fact, experience burnout? Here are just some of the core reasons that we've been able to identify, but I'm sure there are obviously many more. Financial issues. Students entering into college for the first time, and finances obviously can be very limited. In that, issues around working, having to balance student load as well. That's obviously very difficult for many students coming in. And the type of work that's selected. Family pressures. We have to be very sensitive and recognize that many of our students may in fact be first-generation college students, and what a major pressure they have on them in order to fulfill requirements. Or many of our students may in fact have their own family systems. They may have a husband, they may have a wife, they may have children, they may have a parent that they're responsible for caring for in addition to completing their workload. Personal relationships, being affiliated with organizations, having friends, having other issues that may arise in terms of personal relationships. Personal health is also an area that we have to take into accountability of. Because as we look in regards to compassion, fatigue, and burnout, we have to look at such issues like hypertension, diabetes, many of the issues that are chronic in the African American community. And we have to recognize that oftentimes many of the symptoms around that is, in fact, chronic fatigue. Acculturation issues, just entering into school, entering into this campus life, trying to stay focused on completing schoolwork. It is definitely a culture shock for so many of our young people that enter into school, and being able to readily identify acculturation issues and how we can in fact provide that level of support. Many students enter into college and obviously they want to be part of extracurricular activities. Obviously, that's a great route for students to go. Many of our students enter into college on scholarships around football, basketball, tennis, golf, so many issues that are there around extracurricular, and extracurricular obviously takes on a different life of its own. This is a key component that oftentimes we do not think of in terms of student burnout. I can recall when I was in college, and I may be dating myself a little bit, but we did not have as much emphasis early on in college around technology such as Blackboard. Either you submitted your paper or you didn't submit your paper. So oftentimes a lot of students now, they have difficulty around technology. Systems going out, not being able to upload information, data, social media, all of that plays an intricate role in terms of with our students and burnout. Oftentimes, you know, and that's a different session for us to talk about, many of our students are in fact very much engulfed in a lot of social media, and it creates an extra area of burnout that they have to put on top of everything else that they have going on. Another primary area is lack of organization. You know, many of our students entering in, they've been in with mom and dad, and they may not have had that fiscal management support along the way, or they may not be accustomed to time management strategies. So it's imperative that we look at lack of organization and how it actually impacts our students as it relates to burnout. And very unrealistic goals. You know, for many of our students that have been very successful in high school, they enter into college and they're under the impression that once they enter into college, I'm going to be able to ace everything, continue to make all A's, no B's. I'm going to be able to be part of basketball, be able to be in the sorority. But we have to have our students to realize that goals must be measurable and that interventions must be in place in order for them to reach their goals. So this is a very good look. You know, I'm a visual creature, so this is a very good look at terms of how the burnout cycle actually erupts. In this regard, we have the stress arousal, and we'll break each of these down moving forward. But it persists of irritability, anxiety, periods of hypertension, grinding of teeth at night, insomnia, forgetfulness, even palpitations, poor concentration, maybe in fact some headaches that could be present as well. Moving on throughout that cycle, we actually have energy conservation as well. That individual may in fact be late for work, or late for classes, experience some procrastination, increased sexual desire, or in fact decreased sexual desire, persistent tiredness, turning work in late or turning assignments in late. In addition to social withdrawal, and that person may in fact become resentful, experience more apathetic mood, increase things such as coffee and or alcohol. So we have to be very sensitive to that as well. Moving on throughout that cycle, we have what's known as the exhaustion phase. So that's centered primarily around that ongoing sadness, just can't quite seem to shake it. Here again, I think we said depression maybe 4 times if I'm not mistaken. That person's experiencing stomach, bowel problems, chronic mental, they're just mentally drained, physical fatigue, and that person is carrying significant headaches. That person also experiences the desire to just drop out, just throw in the towel, just kind of be away from everything. The desire to move away from friends, work, and perhaps even family, maybe not coming home as frequently as the students were, or maybe not in fact reaching out as often as they were. In this, oftentimes many of our students will in fact have the desire to commit suicide. And you know, when we look at that, you know, that's that elephant in the room. The elephant is certainly there. You know, that oftentimes we really don't want to open up and talk about. We don't think that this is here and it's relevant. But oftentimes being burnout, being overwhelmed, experiencing that level of stress arousal, going through your energy conservation and that exhaustion can oftentimes lead to suicidal ideations in addition to suicidal tendencies. So, like I said, we'll look at the stages of burnout, that first one being stress arousal, the second one being energy conservation, and the third one obviously being exhaustion. So as we talk in regards to stress arousal includes those psychological responses. This could include being persistent irritable, persistent anxiety, and we know that anxiety can be classified as a mental health disorder, possible hypertension, teeth grinding, insomnia, and possible forgetfulness. In terms of the role around energy conservation attempts to compensate for the stress. It's like you're driving your tank on E. You're driving on in, you have just enough fuel to make it to the next stop. Obviously, we know that's not the best care for our engine, but at that particular time, we're focusing on making it to the next stop versus what's in best care for that engine. When the ability to conserve stress fails, various consequences will occur, such as what we talked about in regards to suicidal ideations or tendencies, those feelings of depression, those feelings of wanting to become isolated, or in fact becoming detached. So we know that exhaustion is the final stage where most people finally get an understanding that something is wrong. Houston, we've got a problem. There is definitely something wrong. This typically includes chronic sadness or depression, that word again, chronic stomach problems, bowel problems, mental health problems or mental fatigue, chronic headaches or migraines, and or maybe the desire to refrain from participation in various activities. In order for us to effectively look at the role of compassion fatigue, which is very much interrelated to burnout, it's imperative that we look at sources of burnout. You know, oftentimes we'll say, I'm overwhelmed, I'm feeling really burnt out, I'm really fatigued, and we don't fully look at what those sources are. Burnout issues that are part of the therapeutic relationship, you know, in terms of role boundaries, in terms of knowing when is an appropriate time to cut off, in terms of having a clear, defined role. Oftentimes in nonprofit organizations or in terms of social service organizations, that's an area of difficulty. If you've ever worked social service, you know you develop a quick understanding of learning how to be the CEO as well as the lunch lady as well as the bus driver. But in fact, while that may seem like a very noble task, the difficulty with being able to have a very clearly defined role can in fact cause a person to feel very burned out over time. Time boundaries. While it may be very noble or very great for us to work until midnight or for us to work until 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning, obviously depending on our roles we may have to do that from time to time. But when things of that nature go on for a prolonged period of time, obviously we have to look at the fact of time. And are we being good stewards of our time? Are we practicing good time management strategies? Because definitely when we're becoming so inundated and overwhelmed, that can encompass around time boundaries. Place and space boundaries. This is a really great one. You know, I'm thinking in terms of college students that are entering into school, you learn collectiveness really quickly if you've never had it. But when you enter college, you may have a roommate. You have to work together on group assignments. You know, things are a lot more collective. You learn how to share your ramen noodles. It's just certain things you learn how to do along the way. So definitely in terms of place and space boundaries, just having that moment just to reflect and just having that moment just to have silence or solace is very difficult for many people. Financial boundaries, which we talked about that. Difficulty in times of in working in a lot of nonprofits, fiscal management issues are always obviously an area of concern. So financial boundaries can definitely play a critical role. Closing boundaries. You know, this is an area that we tend to not think about in terms of working directly with clients, but this is another one that's really relevant in terms of areas that may present for burnout with our clients. You know, our clients are entering into programs, we're providing clinical services for them. This is an excellent opportunity to focus in on case management and that collaborative piece. Because in terms of working with our clients that may have been addicted to drugs or alcohol for 10, 15, 20, 30 years, obviously clothing may be the last thing on their mind. So they're overwhelmed because of physical discomfort. You're overwhelmed because they're overwhelmed, and I'm overwhelmed just from knowing that you're overwhelmed, and it creates an entire system of everyone being overwhelmed. And it may be something as simple as an area of discomfort around clothing. Physical boundaries. You know, everyone is not a touchy-feely type of person. Some people do need physical touch. Jerry Chapman does excellent work in terms of talking about our languages of love, which is information that is really critical. So if you've never had an opportunity to check that out, please do so. But some people crave physical touch or physical assessment from others, while other people don't, in fact, actually need that. So physical boundaries are very important. Another key area that we have to look at in terms of sources of burnout is we work in terms of diversity and recognizing that everyone's native tongue may not, in fact, be English. So we have to realize that language boundaries could definitely pose as a primary area of concern for our students as well as for professionals, as well as for educators, for all of us that are working in this field. You know, as we said before, When one of us experiences burnout, everyone experiences burnout. It's not just one person. So this slide is really, really good information because it talks about treatment engagement, and it talks about when individuals are engaged in treatment. And while we may think, hey, I can handle that additional 5 people on my caseload, and everyone's thinking, oh, that's such an excellent clinician, let's vote this person in for Clinician of the Year or Counselor of the Year, the reality remains that as we increase, or as you see here on this slide, as the average caseload increases, the perception of influence, stress arouses, treatment participation actually declines. And guess what happens with burnout? It goes right on up. As we talked a few moments ago, we kind of looked at roles and why roles are so important. So we cannot fully talk about roles unless we're looking at this phenomenon of countertransference issues. And I'm sure that so many of you have heard this terminology before. But I felt that it'd be imperative if we really broke it down. Countertransference issues focus on unresolved historical issues that the clinician, that the educator, that the counselors had not in fact yet resolved or dealt with. So those unresolved may be those underlying childhood issues or those underlying traumatic issues that maybe we've in fact experienced over our period of time. Countertransference issues can also be triggered by some aspect of the client and or the client relationship. You can definitely be working with the client, and that client can in fact remind you of someone, or that student can in fact remind you of someone, or that client or student can in fact bring up some of those issues that maybe have been left as unresolved. Sudden eruption of strong emotions that seem inappropriate in timing or intensity given the content of the occurrence. And I want to go through that one again. Sudden eruption of strong emotions that may seem inappropriate in timing or intensity given the context of occurrence. And as we look throughout this material, we'll talk about things in terms of being able to set up appropriate boundaries and to be able to effectively work with our students or our clients. But we have to keep in context that what may seem like an emergency for one person is not in fact an emergency for the next person. And so we have to understand that while it may seem like a very minor issue for our clients or in fact for our students, that for them getting their paper lost out there with Blackboard could obviously be a very, very critical issue or a primary area of concern for them. So looking forward in regards to looking at vicarious traumatization. Vicarious traumatization is really, really critical and essential. It looks at those inner experiences. We've all experienced those inner areas of conflict or interpersonal turmoil. We've all experienced it. And in that, the conflict of wanting to help, we've all seen it before. When we see things happen, natural disaster, we say, I want to do something to help. I just wish I could do something. I just wish I could be there to make a difference. In terms of looking at vicarious traumatization, we can oftentimes pick up on that from, in fact, reliving or hearing the stories or going through the areas of concern that other individuals are, in fact, experiencing or facing in their lives. We know that vicarious traumatization compromises our safety. As human beings, it's essential that we have that primary element of safety, so that's, in fact, compromised. We know that trust is compromised. We know that competence and intimacy is also compromised, and our primary belief systems. You may believe one way, but after we continue to hear the stories and relive the occurrences and events that have taken place from others, we may in fact experience vicarious traumatization, and in that opportunity, our own belief systems are in fact swayed. So a closer look at compassion fatigue. Medical professionals such as physicians, nurses, psychotherapists, and emergency workers who've helped traumatized patients may develop their own post-traumatic stress disorder, which we know this is classified in the DSM-5 as being a mental health disorder, PTSD. Symptoms as an indirect response to their patient suffering. So as we work with patients over the years, some people may in fact start to seem as they are desensitized in terms of what's going on around them, or they've seen this before, and it's their own way of trying to dissociate from what's in fact going on at that particular time. But we know the research indicates that there are some specific links to PTSD, and we'll talk about secondary traumatization in a few moments, but there are some direct links to PTSD in response to working with clients that experience significant periods of suffering. In looking at compassion fatigue, we know that our medical professionals, mental health care professionals, emergency workers, clergy, counselors, educators, and volunteers who work with people with significant physical and emotional illnesses are at risk for compassion fatigue. However, anyone that is called upon to be a caregiver is in fact vulnerable to becoming a victim of compassion fatigue. In looking at compassion fatigue, it's important that we look at key concepts. That person may in fact have no energy to relate to friends and or family. As much as they may want to, that energy level is just drained and they simply can't. The clinician finds it emotionally difficult to relate to others' feelings. As a clinician, it's important that we have a very non-biased role in terms of working with our clients. And part of that is allowing them a safe place to fully open up and express their feelings, areas of concern. And so often, when we look at things such as Stephen Covey, he does excellent work on habits of highly effective people. One of the critical elements is, in terms of like habit 5, is we need to seek first to understand, then to be understood. And that's primarily where our clients are. Our clients want to know that we understand where they're coming from. We hear you. We're not just listening to them, but we're listening with intensity to be able to reflect upon what the client is in fact sharing with us. So oftentimes when we're working with clients and we're in fact experiencing compassion fatigue, we may in fact find it emotionally difficult to relate to others' feelings. It may become to the point where we become irritable, hostile, and have difficulty with being able to relate. We become unconscious in terms of protective shields to guard against being overwhelmed. We can do that without even in fact recognizing it. And with compassion fatigue, it's important that we realize that we're triggered by some real aspect of the client or in fact that client's relationship. The psychological and emotional state in which the caregiver feels depleted, numb, and exhausted, unlike normal fatigue, which is alleviated by rest, this state can in fact become chronic. So we know that with burnout, maybe watching a little television, having our favorite snack, just retreating can in fact support us in being able to move from burnout into feeling better that next day. But with compassion fatigue, we know that this state can in fact become chronic. So with all of this information that we shared, maybe some of us are thinking, maybe I need to see the doctor. Maybe I need to seek out an area of support. Maybe I need to just go sit down and talk to a healthcare professional about what is in fact going on with me, and how will I even in fact describe what is going on with me, because I don't know how to describe it. So let's go see the doctor. Well, it looks like the doctor is in fact suffering from compassion fatigue as well, because remember we said that this phenomenon of compassion fatigue can happen to any and everyone that is a caregiver or working in the area of the helping profession. So we've looked and we've talked about some of the sources or reasons around compassion fatigue and looking at the difference between compassion fatigue and burnout, recognizing that compassion fatigue can in fact become chronic. Burnout may be able to be alleviated through more acute ways of remedy. So some of the ways to avoid compassion fatigue is having a manageable patient load, knowing how to set professional boundaries, embracing the opportunity in terms of working as a teamwork, not being afraid to call on your fellow colleagues that may be more savvy in computer information, or your colleagues that may be better in organization, being true to self and recognizing that teamwork is critical. Embracing mental health days. We all have days on books and days that we can utilize, and part of that is taking care of our mental health. And mental health days does not mean that we're taking on 15 other tasks while we're on a mental health day. It means truly, truly taking an opportunity to retreat, self-reflect on how holistic approaches to self-care is imperative. Having open communication, not just agenda type communication with your clinical supervisor. If there's a case that's bothering you, or if there's a student that you're having difficulty being able to work with, or if there's a true area of concern, being able to be very open in that communication, being able to ask those open-ended questions. Regular clinical supervision, we are creatures of habit. So in fact, having clinical supervision to take place on an ongoing basis. As a clinical supervisor, it's imperative that you're meeting with clinicians and you're meeting with your staff on a regular, ongoing basis to be able to provide them with that area of support. We're empowered the more that we know. So continuing education, continuing trainings, webinars, reading material, sharing experiences, life learning experiences with other individuals is always imperative. The ability to share our feelings in an assertive manner, not aggressive, but sharing what those boundaries are, what they look like, and what we're willing to engage in. Let clients and coworkers know our limitations in a respectful manner. Processing concerns out, being willing to talk it out. Above all, ensuring that we have a safe work environment. You know, when you think about compassion fatigue, and we see on the news where many of our students are being accosted and assaulted as they walk to their dormitories, it's imperative that our students recognize that we have your safety and best interests at hand. And so we saw that not too long ago with the ice storm, in which, university systems were very much concerned about the safety and well-being of students. So just think, if you had to think in terms of how am I going to get here, how am I going to maneuver, am I going to be safe when I'm there in the particular environment? It's imperative for individuals to know that their environment is safe. In terms of looking at ways to avoid compassion fatigue, it's imperative that we stay focused and organized, practicing imperative time management skills, keeping our spaces in organized facets, prioritizing what's first. Taking regular breaks. This is one that's really imperative. And not just taking breaks in terms of I'm taking a break and I'm going to eat, but taking a break and actually walking around, drinking water, paying attention to our breathing, maybe going outside, maybe fellowshipping with colleagues or coworkers is imperative. Engaging in hobbies or positive recreation. And this is an area that we really should focus on with our students and, in fact, with our clients. Because in terms of engaging in a hobby or positive recreation, we know that finances could definitely be an issue, but there are so many positive and rewarding activities that our students can become involved in, sororities, civic organizations, volunteering. All of these are ways in which we can combat compassion fatigue. But it's imperative that we really focus in on the importance of positive recreation and the need for them to avoid things such as alcohol and or drugs as ways to relax. Taking care of our own personal health. If we've been having a headache for the past week or past month, taking time to assess our own personal health and our own well-being. We talked about managing time and why that's so critical, and creating an atmosphere of balance. When our atmosphere is an atmosphere of a balance, we're able to get those tasks completed. We're able to stay focused and to stay organized. We feel safe. We're able to communicate in a coherent manner. We want to create lists of prioritization because things come up throughout the day, but we want to definitely set those goals. And as we said once before, we want to set goals that are measurable and goals that have interventions along the way in order for us to be able to accomplish those goals. And we definitely want to encourage ourselves with positive reward. This is the piece in terms of when we're working with our students and clients, we want to be able to fully differentiate and talk with them about the difference in positive rewards and negative rewards, and how negative rewards are in fact a downward spiral and lead us deeper into that hole of compassion fatigue, versus positive rewards such as having lunch with a good friend, going out for a walk, maybe going out to relax, things of that nature, versus consuming ourselves with things such as sugary treats, alcohol, and or drugs. Those are all things that while we may experience that initial boost, along the way and throughout the day it can cause us to feel more and more drained. So we know that there are various ways to combat compassion fatigue, and being able to assess ourselves for compassion fatigue on an ongoing basis is critical. We have to do self-assessments ongoing. We have to be willing to speak with another helping professional and debrief. We're leaving meetings or leaving classes and things of that nature. We just may not feel the mood or the time frame to talk about it, but designating time to debrief along the way. Proactively develop a plan for self-care and be willing to stick to that plan in an assertive manner. With New Year's, we set a lot of goals. We're cutting carbs out of our diet. We're doing so many things to make ourselves better. Along the way, it seems like sticking in terms of developing that plan for self-care is essential in terms of us being able to employ balance in our life. We have to look at our relationships, those relationships that we're carrying, and be willing to set those boundaries in place. All relationships are not, in fact, created the same. Are our relationships, in fact, toxic? Are our relationships counterproductive, or are they productive? Being able to yield to those relationships that are, in fact, productive are all areas that we can focus on with our students and or clients. We have to be determined to be healthy. While the vending machine may be the quickest fit for us for that particular moment, maybe it means we have to wake up a little bit earlier to pack a healthy snack or to make sure that we're consuming enough water, but we have to be determined to be as healthy as possible. We have to use those mental health days, and I went on to say not even just mental health days. We have to use moments, seconds, nanoseconds. We have to pull on the gravity. We have to do everything that we can do. We have to be intentional concerning our well-being. We have the opportunity to decide. We have to, in fact, avoid negative rewards, encouragement through positive self-talk, positive self-affirmation, positive imagery. We have to give ourselves permission. We have to give ourselves permission to do all of this in the first place. And we have to put first persons first. Here again, that's that same concept of what Stephen Covey talks about with those habits of highly effective people, being able to put first things first. But in terms of this, we're putting first persons first. So we talked a bit, and we're just going to briefly go through this because I want you all to have this, but we talked about the importance of doing ongoing self-assessment. With the new year, we set these resolutions as we talked about, and obviously research shows that people typically drop out of their resolutions around February, so it's around that time that people typically stop with their clean living and dieting and things of that nature. We have to make it priority to do ongoing assessments on ourselves. Here's just some variables there in terms of the compassion fatigue self-test study that we talked about. And we talked about Mashlow's early on and how there are different variables in terms of compassion fatigue self-test. And it's just some tools. Let's just look at just a few of the questions that are there. So a few of the questions that are there are talking about, like number 3, it talks about I have gaps in my memory about certain events. You know, I startle easily. You know, I'm dropping things. I become a very sensitive person. Or I have those flashbacks connected to my clients and or my family. Number 1 definitely talks about those areas of avoidance. So these are all imperative tools that we can use in terms of being able to assess for compassion fatigue. Obviously, all of us have our own story to tell, and we have to be very, very clear in terms of if we've, in fact, experienced firsthand traumatic events in life. And sometimes when we think about trauma, we're thinking about trauma as it relates to very significant disasters and things of that nature. But trauma for a person could be you're working with the client and you recognize that maybe in your childhood life that maybe you didn't have the significant watchful oversight from a parent, and this client is talking about these feelings and it's erupting these feelings in you. So we really want to focus in on that. Number 15 is I have thought that there is no one to talk to about highly stressful experiences. Having mentors, having people that are for you, people that are in your corner, people that will share what's worked for them historically, what hasn't worked for them historically, and helping you to pave the way are some of the ways that we could definitely support our clients and our students in terms of working through compassion fatigue. And you all can read through the list there as well. You'll see some more there also. So some items about being a helper and or in your workplace. Some areas that they're assessing for is, have you felt weak, tired, run down as a result of your work as a helper? Have you felt depressed? That's that key word again. Are you having difficulty, in fact, separating personal life from your work life? When you wake up in the morning, it's the first thing you're thinking about, what I have to do when I go to work. When you go to sleep, it's the first thing that you're thinking about is what I have to do as a student. I have to get my paper in. Also, number 38 talks about, do you have thoughts that you are, in fact, a failure as a helper? You know, in terms of if we're looking at maybe working with aging parents or helping loved ones that may be experiencing some difficulty along the way, do we, in fact, feel like we are a failure in terms of providing that level of support? Number 39 talks about thoughts that you're not succeeding at achieving in terms of your life goals. Because remember, we said early on, we want to set very small, specific, measurable goals that are followed up by direct interventions in terms of how we can, in fact, achieve those goals. So it gives you some information here about how to score the compassion fatigue self-test. And this information is actually from Florida State University from their psychosocial stress research program. In addition to that, in terms of working with our clients and working with our students, it's important that we are resourceful. We talked early on about some of the critical experiences that our students and our clients, in fact, experience. And here are just some links that are here around being able to plan for personal self-care. Look at relapse prevention. A lot of individuals that work in the area of addictive disease are, in fact, in recovery themselves. And so we definitely want to practice best care practices. Another really good article is from the Genuine Coaching System, in which it talks about everyday self-care workbook. So here are some resources here as we continue to develop our tool bank. So maybe we're thinking now we've taken all of this information in, and how can we, in fact, create a self-care plan? We want to be very specific. We want to consider our population. And considering our population, we want to consider resources that are within our population that are available to us. We want to consider historical stressors. If we're part of university systems, is there historical content there of maybe students being accosted in terms of walking, or is there a historical stressor there of maybe some type of on-campus violence? What are some historical stressors that have been there? We want to consider environmental factors in terms of working with self-care plans, because we want it to be realistic. We want to consider, is it a safe and conducive environment for our students to do things that we provided for them in their personal environment. We want to consider positive reinforcements. We have an opportunity to say, you know, hey, I noticed that that assignment must have been really difficult, and I noticed that you were able to work through that task. Please do share some of the key components that you did in terms of being able to successfully complete that project. In social service, we use this acronym known as SNAP. So we want to always consider, whenever we're working with anyone, you know, it's not an I effort, it's a team effort. We want to consider each individual's strengths, that person's needs, abilities, and that person's personal preference in terms of developing a self-care plan. We want to consider resources, which that's why that slide came before, because it's imperative that we have resources at hand. We want to consider the frequency of self-care. You know, this should be an ongoing, like we said, we're grasping every minute, every moment, every nanosecond of self-care. We want it to be very personalized, and above all, we just want to consider all of the factors that are in place. Some additional tools, and you all can definitely read by that, but some of my favorite resources that are here are Compassion Fatigue, Coping with Secondary Traumatic Stress Disorders, and Those Who Treat the Traumatized by Figley, Charles Figley, that is. And then obviously SAMHSA has some great tools here. We have the TIP 52 Clinical Supervision and Professional Development. Another really critical piece here that we could focus on as well is Running on Empty. If you haven't read that, that's a very good tool to add in our toolbox, and it focuses on compassion fatigue in the healthcare profession as well. So our references that are there are primarily focused around SAMHSA, NIDA. We have some information there from Genuine Coaching, Everyday Self-Care, and we have additional resources that are there in terms of from University of Georgia, in addition to the Burnout Cycle, which is actually there from Fernberger and North Carolina. So questions. Some of the primary questions that we received is compassion fatigue and mental health disorder. Well, remember, there's been some revisions in terms of in the DSM-5. You know, DSM-4, 3, 2, 1, now we're to the 5, and there's definitely been some changes. So we know that instead of the 3 symptoms clusters, we now have 4. Those 4 clusters are around re-experiencing, avoidance, negative cognitions, mood, and arousal. All things that we talked about in compassion fatigue. And like we said early on, we definitely focused around depression, we focused around anxiety, and we also focused around PTSD in terms of compassion fatigue. So definitely, you know, if a person is experiencing compassion fatigue, there's some off branches that are there that they could certainly have an opportunity to follow up on if needed. Other questions that are there is, there a link associated with secondary trauma and or compassion fatigue? And that's an excellent question. Secondary trauma is commonly referred to as the stress resulting from helping or wanting to help a traumatized person. So there are definitely correlations that are there or links that are there as it relates to some of the hallmarks, such as those feelings of loss, those feelings of wanting to dissociate, those feelings of wanting to give up, that apathetic mood that may in fact be there. So there is a direct link that's associated. This is really critical as we look at our college students. What is the correlation to college dropout and compassion fatigue, or in fact burnout? We know that in terms of looking at statistics around college dropout through the college advisory, that 33% of students drop out of college within their first year. We know that 40% will not even in fact earn a degree, and 53% of students at public institutions will in fact drop out. So we have to look at that, in terms of it being very significant in terms of our students. So we have to say, what are some of the top reasons for burnout, or some of the top reasons for dropping out of college? Some of those reasons, which we talked about, are finances, failing, work, being unprepared, too much extracurricular activity, difficulty with coursework, family problems, relationship problems, just being plain old-fashioned homesick, not having a mentor, which we talked about how imperative that is, health issues, new courses, just life in general, moving on, having children, having housing issues. But one of the primary areas of concern that they talk about is just feeling burnout. If I try to practice various self-care techniques and I'm still experiencing compassion fatigue, should I in fact seek professional support? Obviously, yeah. As long as we're not seeking it from that physician that was in fact experiencing compassion fatigue himself. But definitely, yes, if we're experiencing those areas of compassion fatigue, because we have to recognize that as we talk, it's tied into our physical well-being as well. So we definitely want to support our clients. We definitely want to support our students in terms of practicing holistic care. And so when we're looking at being off balance, we may have issues such as hypertension, diabetes. All of these things may be in place. So certainly if we're experiencing compassion fatigue, it is in our best interest to seek professional support. Okay, Dr. Harrington and Mrs. Trent, I will open the floor up for questions at this time.
All those who are on the line can unmute your lines
The
now
leader has
for your
unmuted your
questions.
line.
If you have questions, unmute your lines and let us have your questions right away, please.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, hi. My name is Janetta Mitchell, and I'm calling from Allen University in Columbia, South Carolina. Greetings. And I want to just say thank you for this presentation. I found it very helpful. I think actually presentations like this is extremely helpful. Actually, this helps to combat, compassion fatigue just by listening to the explanations of the presenter and for her going through the information. I found that kind of soothing, actually, and I think it'll better assist me in coping with certain situations that may come up throughout the semester. So I want to say thank you very much for that information.
Thank you for sharing your comment, and you're absolutely right. Just the opportunity for us to, in fact, know, we can go around all day and we're not feeling well, we're feeling overwhelmed, but for us to, in fact, know and to be able to recognize some of the sources, it's imperative, and it is refreshing when we have an opportunity to know. So thank you so much for your comment.
You're welcome.
Other questions? Further questions? Going once, going twice? Further questions going 3 times? If not, you have an opportunity to ask questions later. But anyway, I like on behalf of the HBCU CFE, we would like to thank all of you who were on the line and be on the line or on the phones or on both. And we appreciate your time and effort. And we also want to thank our guest speaker today who gave us this most timely information. And there's a quote here that I can leave you with, is when we decide to take on the role as a caregiver, we have to be sure to take on the role of practice self-care and unconditional positive regard, and that's by an unknown author. So on behalf of the CFE, again, thank all who participated, and Joan Trent will come back on the line and give you a few more housekeeping information.
Thank you, Dr. Maddox. And again, thank you, Lisa. And thank our audience. I'd like to thank you all for your participation today. Lisa's information is on the screen. And if you have any questions or comments you'd like to share with her, please feel free to use her email address and or give her a phone call. She can further discuss with you this topic and or provide you with additional resource information that you may want to utilize on your campus or in your counseling center. Dr. Harrington and I have also provided our email address and phone number and our website for the Center for Excellence, so that you can go to our website to garner additional resource information, as we will post this broadcast on our website within the next week or so. Again, the PowerPoint presentation is available for you. All you need to do is email me, and I will send you out a copy of the presentation. If you are interested in a certificate for your participation today, unfortunately we don't do the CEUs. However, the certificate for participation is great to show that you did participate in this 1-hour behavioral health distant learning webinar. So again, just send me an email, and I'll get that out to you again probably within the next week or so. So if there are no additional questions, please give us an email or a call. And Dr. Harrington had something else he wanted to say as we wrap up.
Yeah, just to keep you informed and abreast of what we're doing here at the CFE, there will be a public service campaign coming up very shortly and very soon. And we would like for you to just go on our website, which is www.hbcucfe.net, to keep up with all the activities that we'll be presenting and asking for your participation.
So again, thank you all for your participation, and we're asking Lisa to remain on the line. But thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, and have a great day.
You too.
All right.